I want to tell you about the night I stood on a sidewalk with one suitcase and nowhere to go. It was raining. Of course, it was raining. The kind of cold October rain that soaks through everything: your coat, your shoes, your resolve. I was 27 years old, married for 3 years, and I had just been thrown out of my in-laws' house by a woman who had never once called me by my first name. "You are not welcome here," my mother-in-law Margaret had said, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, voice like a closing door. You never were. Let me tell you how I got there. Daniel and I had met in college, fallen in love the way young people do, fast, completely, without any of the caution that experience teaches you. He was kind, funny, the kind of man who made you feel like the most interesting person in any room. What he was not, and what I did not fully understand until it was too late, was independent. Daniel had grown up in the shadow of Margaret Carter, a woman who had built her entire identity around her son, who had chosen his schools, his friends, his career path, and, she had tried very hard, his wife. I was not the wife she had chosen. I was the wife he had chosen, and Margaret Carter did not forgive that. The first 3 years of our marriage were a slow erosion, not dramatic, not loud, quiet. Margaret's comments on Sunday dinners, the way she spoke to Daniel as if I wasn't in the room, the family decisions made without my input, holidays, finances, even where we would live. We lived in their house. That was the arrangement Daniel had agreed to before we married. Temporarily, he said, just until we saved enough for our own place. Temporarily became 1 year, then 2, then 3. And in that house, I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome in the eyes of the woman who ran it. I tried. I genuinely tried. I cooked. I cleaned. I worked full-time and contributed to household expenses. I bit my tongue at dinners and smiled at comments that were designed to diminish, and held my marriage together with both hands while it was being pulled apart from the outside. But Margaret was patient in the way that powerful people are patient. She waited, and when Daniel was offered a position overseas, a 6-month contract too good to refuse, she made her move. 3 days after he left, she came to my room. "I think it's time you found your own arrangements," she said. Daniel and I discussed. "Daniel is not here," she said. "I am." She gave me a week. I was packed and standing on the sidewalk in 5 days. 1 suitcase, my laptop, my documents, the small amount of savings I had kept in an account she didn't know about, and something else, something she didn't know I had. I went to my friend Kara's apartment. She gave me her couch, a blanket, and a glass of wine without asking a single question. That's what real friendship looks like. I lay awake that first night staring at her ceiling, and I made a decision. Not an emotional decision, a strategic one. I had spent 3 years being quiet, being patient, being the good daughter-in-law who absorbed everything and said nothing. That was over. Let me tell you about the document. 8 months before Daniel left for his overseas contract, his father, Robert Carter, a quiet man who had spent 30 years being managed by his wife, had come to me privately. I had been in the garden, reading. It was one of the few places in that house where Margaret's presence didn't reach. Robert sat beside me. He was not well. He hadn't been well for some time, a heart condition that Margaret discussed only in whispers and euphemisms. He talked for a long time that afternoon, about the house, about his marriage, about the things he had watched happen under his own roof that he had been too weak or too tired to stop. "She's going to push you out," he said. "I've seen her do it before, to Daniel's first girlfriend, to my sister, to anyone who threatens what she thinks is hers." "I can handle Margaret," I said. He shook his head. "No," he said, "but I can help you." Robert Carter passed away 4 months later.
quietly, in his sleep, the way gentlemen sometimes go. Margaret organized the funeral with military precision and accepted condolences with the practiced composure of a woman who had already moved on to logistics. What she did not know, what no one knew except me and Robert's private attorney, was that 6 weeks before he died, Robert Carter had signed a document, a transfer of property. The house, his house, built with his money in his name, the house that Margaret had always treated as her kingdom but had never actually owned. He transferred it to me. "You're the only one who ever treated this house like a home," he had told me that afternoon in the garden. "Not a prize, not a weapon, a home." I cried when the attorney called me, not because of what I had been given, because of what it meant that he had given it. I sat on Kara's couch with my laptop and my documents, and I called the attorney back. "I'm ready," I said. "Ready for what?" he asked. "To move forward," I said.
I did not tell Daniel. I know that sounds calculated, and perhaps it was, but Daniel had left me in that house, had taken an overseas contract without fully understanding, or perhaps without wanting to understand, what he was leaving me to face. He called twice a week, asked how things were. I told him fine. Fine. The word women use when they are doing something you wouldn't understand if they explained it. I worked with the attorney, filed the paperwork, handled every step of the transfer process with the same quiet efficiency I had brought to every other part of my life that Margaret had tried to make difficult. And then I called Daniel, not to tell him about the house, to tell him something else. "I've been thinking," I said, "about us, about what I've been carrying, about the fact that you left and never once asked if I was okay." Silence on his end. "I'm not okay, Daniel," I said. "I haven't been okay for a long time, and I think somewhere you know that and you left anyway." More silence. "I want to talk when you come back," I said. "Really talk, not the version where we pretend everything is fine." He said he loved me. I said I knew. I hung up and sat in the quiet of Kara's apartment and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Clear. The attorney called on a Thursday morning. "It's done," he said. "The transfer is complete. The property is legally yours." I sat with that for a moment. The house where I had cooked 1,000 meals that went unacknowledged, where I had smiled through Sunday dinners that were designed to erode me, where I had stood on the doorstep with one suitcase while rain soaked through my coat. Mine. Not as revenge, not as victory, as justice. Robert Carter had seen what no one else had bothered to look for, and he had made it right in the only way he could. I went back to the house on a Monday. Not because I had to, because I chose to. I rang the doorbell. Margaret answered. She looked at me the way she always had, with that particular expression of a woman who has decided you don't matter and wants to make sure you know it. "What are you doing here?" she said, not a question. "I live here," I said. She laughed, the short, dismissive kind. "You were asked to leave," she said. "By you," I said, "not by the owner." She stared at me. I reached into my bag, slowly, deliberately, and I placed the document on the doorstep between us. She looked down at it. I watched her read it. I watched the color leave her face. "This isn't possible," she said. "Robert signed it 6 weeks before he passed," I said. "The transfer has been legally processed and recorded. I have a copy for your attorney if they need it." Margaret said many things after that. Loud things, legal threats, the names she had always wanted to call me but had previously delivered in more polished packaging. I let her finish. Then I said, "I'm not here to take your home, Margaret. I'm here because Robert gave me the choice, and I'm choosing to offer you a fair arrangement. You may continue living here under a formal tenancy agreement at a reasonable rate. The paperwork is already prepared." She stared at me. "You would do that," she said slowly. "Robert built this house," I said. "He wanted it to be a home, not a weapon. I intend to honor that." Daniel came back 6 weeks later. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. It took another 4 months of difficult conversations and couples therapy before we found our way back to each other, or rather to a new version of each other that was more honest than anything we had built before. Margaret signed the tenancy agreement. She has never once called me by my first name, but she has not called me nothing either. Progress, I have decided, comes in many forms. People ask me if I did it for revenge. I did not. I did it because Robert Carter saw me when no one else was looking, and the least I could do was honor that by becoming exactly the woman he believed I already was. I kept the house. I kept my marriage, the real one, the rebuilt one, and I kept, above everything else, myself. That was the only thing I had carried in that suitcase that truly mattered, and no one had ever been able to take it.